This is Katie from Girl Teaches Girl, and today we're going to talk about changing your brake pads. So the first thing you're going to have to do is order your parts. If you are familiar with the type of brakes your car has, you'll know to ask for a disc or a drum brake. A lot of the times people don't know what kind of brake pads they have. So a trick is to either take off the tire, or you can look inside the tire and see if it's a disc or a drum brake. So looking through these little holes, I can see a shiny rotor, and it's going to be silver, and over here I can see the actual brake assembly, and that is the disc brake. So this front tire has disc brakes. In the back I have drum brakes. And you can tell because when you look in, you can't see the silver shiny rotor, and you can see basically like a drum. Chances are you've taken your car somewhere and they've told you that your car needs brakes, and maybe you can ask them what kind of brake pads you need. When you order your part, you're going to have to tell them the year, make, and model of your car so you can look in your car's book for that information. First thing we have to do is lift the car up. Before we lift the car up, we're going to loosen the lug nuts on the tire. And so, lefty, loosey, righty, tighty. So lefty is counterclockwise, and we're going to loosen that. Sometimes you might not be able to do that by hand. So if for some reason it's too tight and you can't do it, you can step up, and it'll give you that extra torque or leverage that you need to loosen that lug. So now that I've loosened all the lug nuts, I'm going to lift up the car. I will be using a hydraulic jack. I recognize that a lot of people don't have this. You could use the jack that comes with your car, or you can go to a car part store and buy a jack. I am going to position this so that it is under a solid piece of the frame. And make sure it's tightened all the way to the right, and start raising. I always use an additional jack stand to hold up the car, just as a safety precaution. Now that I've got my jack stand in place, I'm going to take the tire out. Here you can see your brake assembly. This is your rotor, and this is your brake pad caliper assembly. What happens here is brake fluid comes through these lines and pushes the caliper so that it compresses the brake pad against the rotor, and that's how your car stops. So what we have to do is take off this brake assembly right here. We have 2 bolts that I need to loosen. So let me go get my tools. So this is what we need to take off. There's a bolt up here and a bolt down here. I am using a 12mm socket wrench. I'm working on a 98 Honda Civic, so this is specific to my car. Not everybody's car is the same. It might be different in yours. So earlier I said that righty is tighty and lefty is loosey. The screws that I'm screwing are facing me the opposite direction, so I have to pretend that I am on the other side doing righty tighty, lefty loosey. So it's going to be a little backwards. So now loosey is clockwise if the screws are facing me. It's a little backwards, but you'll figure it out. So these are normally really, really tight. I pre-loosened them. But you're going to have to get clever to find ways to use yourself as leverage, and I'll show you in a moment. So we've loosened that one a bit. I'm going to loosen this one down here. Let me change positions. So this one's really tight, and I couldn't do it physically And so what I'm gonna do is basically use my body weight as leverage. You have to be very careful not to have your face in the line of fire. So don't sit yourself somewhere that the tool could come down and hit you in the face. Keep your face away and just use your body strength to pull what you need to loosen. And eventually you'll get it loose enough that you don't have to sit like this to do it. I am having a problem here where when I turn this bolt, it's not loosening because back here is a washer type thing that keeps spinning. So if my bolt is spinning and this is spinning, I'm never going to get this bolt off. So what I'm going to do is take this wonderful plier and hold on to the spinning washer type thing, and I am going to loosen it just like that, and we're free. And this is finger tight. There we go. Now we can take off the brake assembly. So the part that you're going to be taking off is here. This does not come off. It is this back piece. And sometimes it can be pretty stuck. So you're going to have to find some ways to get it off. I've been working at it with a hammer, and you can just kind of pound away. And I have also been using a flathead screwdriver as a chisel, and I've been pushing and hammering at it. Important things to remember. You don't want to scratch up your rotor. This, if you can see it, this is your old brake pad. It doesn't matter what you do to it. You can do whatever you want to it. So you can destroy it all you want in order to get off this brake assembly, just like that. Now, here is part of the old brake pad, which I'm gonna have to get off. There we go. This was one of the reasons it was so hard, because in my infinite wisdom I decided to use that stuff. Anyway, this is your caliper, and at some point I'm going to have to replace mine. That's not today's video. We are going to compress this caliper. To do that, I generally take one of my old brake pads, I put it on the caliper. Bear with me for one moment. And I use a clamp. And I loosen up this clamp, and I might need to get a bigger clamp. This might not be a big enough one to fit with the brake pad and the caliper assembly. And it's not. I actually have to get a bigger clamp, so excuse me. So this is what I call overcompensating, but this is my next size up. So I fit the clamp on my, whatever I called this thing earlier, and the caliper, and I have my brake pad on the other side because we're going to be compressing this. And what I'm going to do is tighten this. But before I can do that even, we have to go up and we have to loosen the cap on the master cylinder. Inside your beautiful 98 Honda Civic engine, you'll find your master cylinder up on the upper right hand corner, and you'll just loosen the cap and let it sit. The reason you have to do this before you compress the caliper is This is a closed hydraulic system. If you go to compress the caliper with the cap off, it might be harder because pressure has to go somewhere. And if the cap is closed, there's no way for the pressure to escape. So we're gonna loosen the cap, and now we can squeeze the caliper. Because remember, brake line is running all through these lines up to that caliper. Brake fluid. So, if you watch here, you can see my caliper compressing. This is a necessary step because you won't be able to fit the new brake pad on with the caliper out. And that's because the new brake pad is a lot thicker than your old brake pad. Your old brake pad's probably worn out. So there we go. Now we can take this clamp off. Ooh. Old brake pad. Move that up out of the way. You can see here on the rotor, I took the brake pad off of this side. I'm going to take this old brake pad off. Done. We don't need those. So now we're going to put on our new brake pads. Oh, look what I did to my pants. This slides in to the clamps that are on this assembly. So we're just going to slide it on. And it clamps right on. And you can see the difference between an old brake pad and a new brake pad. Let me just see real quick if I got that. And we put the caliper assembly back on top, just like that.
Wait, flush.
It'll flush itself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When you step on the brakes.
Understood.
Yeah. So what Tabby's saying is our brake pad isn't quite flush on the rotor. And that's okay, because when the caliper actually compresses the brake pads, it'll tighten it right up to it. Thank you for pointing that out.
Figure if I don't know, they don't know.
And so now, what we're going to do is retighten those screws that we took off earlier. So, I'm going to get it nice and finger tight before I tighten it with my socket wrench. There's probably a torque setting for this, and what I mean by that is a specific amount of pressure that you need to apply to tighten these bolts for it to be like factory tight. Generally, I go with, I'm not very strong, so I'm not really going to over tighten it. I'm not going to strip it or anything. So I'll go with about as tight as I can do it by hand, and I'll call it good. So we have to switch our socket wrench to the other direction and tighten. Now we're going to run into the same problem that I had earlier where this little washer thing back here spins. So I'm going to hold on to it. And tighten. And that's pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing to this one up here. And it's kind of nice because I can turn this way with this one and the other way with the other one. So I'm tightening at the same time. And I just hit myself in the face. Remember I told you not to do that. Don't put your face in the line of fire. So we are good and done with this side. I have to put the tire back on. And remember when I told you when you're taking off and putting a tire on, you tighten and loosen the lug nuts in the opposite direction. So you tighten the one across from the other one before you tighten the one next to it. Okay, so after you've got the tires back on the car, you need to start your car and pump the brakes. And you're going to notice that the brakes go to the floor. And you just keep pumping. And before you start pumping the brakes, you have to make sure that you've recapped your master cylinder. And pump until it gets hard again. And then after you've done that, you're going to want to make sure that your master cylinder has brake fluid in it, and you're ready to go. Thanks for watching.
I feel like Anderson Cooper down here.